The VC at the time that wanted to do the 3 million price reached out to get on the phone with me, and they basically asked for valuation to be cut in half after an executed term sheet.
This is Funded, a show where founders who raised millions in venture capital share the gritty side of what it actually took to get that money in the bank. I'm Jason Ye. Not too long ago, I was trying to get my ideas funded. And back in the day, I was a VC listening to founders pitch me for money. Like a lot of founders, Tiffany Kelly, founder and CEO of Curastory, entered the startup scene knowing she needed to raise money, but not having a clue of where to start. So with an interesting idea, no knowledge on fundraising, some wireframes, and a really crappy deck, Tiffany went out to raise her pre-seed in 2021. With that type of intro, you'd probably guess correctly that she had a rough go at it, really rough. But with a lot of perseverance, she was able to actually close a really solid round. Fast forward to today in 2023, where Tiffany just closed a successful but super rocky seed round. Not surprising given today's current fundraising market. Now, one thing that's consistent in both life and fundraising is that things don't always go as planned. Sometimes things get messy. But what really matters is what you decide to do with that mess. For Tiffany, she experienced what can only be described as every founder's worst fundraising nightmare, the ultimate startup mess. Hold on tight. This one's about to get spicy.
I was definitely a very fiery, passionate kid. There's a few instances I remember just in high school and growing up. I went to a very affluent high school, all girls high school in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I played volleyball. So our high school, we were actually state champions. So, I mean, we were treated like football players. So we had 2-a-days, and just the volleyball team at my school is super revered. And so I think there was one practice where like some of the girls were goofing off and I just got into this like militant mode. Like I think all of the data points that I have as a teenager, I was like, okay, I'm a little bit more passionate and intense, I think, than most.
Sounds like as an elite athlete too, you weren't stranger to hard work. 2-a-days, like tell me a little bit about 2-a-days. What does that feel like?
I mean, you're exhausted. Like I just had a super rigid schedule, and I think when you have a super rigid schedule, you're actually better at time management. I think a lot of what I was taught with competitive sports and also just performing at a super high level, like I played in college. So I'm like playing, I mean, the youngest I could probably remember is like 3, 4. My dad just threw me in a pool because he was one of the first national black champions in swimming. And so he just threw me in a pool when I was a baby. And I mean, I played sports until like after my freshman, sophomore year in college. So it's really interesting, I think, just how we operate. That translates a lot to running a company. You just have these big momentum shifts, right? Like
Yeah.
you literally can't leave a game if you're losing. You have to play until the end of it. And so I think what's interesting is if you're down maybe like, I don't know, 30 points to 15 maybe, you literally can't
You've
leave.
won games like that. And you've won
And
games
and
where
we've
you're
won
down.
games like that. And it's like you can't leave the game. And so maybe something happens in the game where just momentum shifts and you have to ride off that momentum. And so I think
Yeah.
as a founder, it's always like that next big push for me. Like I just need like a little bit of a break. And if I get a little bit of a break, like I just ride that momentum out until the next big push. And so I feel like playing competitive sports, it's allowed me just this mentality that like I'm never down, I'm never out. There's always something's always going to break and there's always going to be a momentum shift because all of my friends, they're just like, we've been waiting for you to burn out for years. And I'm just like, it's not going to happen. Like, I'm literally not going to burn out. Like, I was built for this, but also I've been through the ringer like this so many different times. And a lot of the times
Totally.
it is mental and just like riding those momentum waves when things are are in your favor for like maybe 5 seconds and then just getting to the next big push. So that's how I operate. I don't look at the super, super, super big grand scheme of things, 'cause I think that can freak people out. But it's just like, okay, what's the next big push and next big thing to focus on?
So, super interesting background, and love the little insight into how you were raised. You know,
Yeah.
dad was an athlete. Even taking the story of being dropped in the deep end, if you will, like it feels like that is a reoccurring theme. If I had to guess, um, what? Tell me a little bit about your transition into your career, right? Did your parents push you into doing anything? Were they entrepreneurs yourself? Like, tell me a little bit about the earliest days of your career.
Yeah, both my parents, super steady jobs. My mom worked in government, and before she worked in government, she actually was a programmer at MIT, and my dad, professor and a pastor. So, but we sports was just the glue between my family. Like everyone played athletics at a very high level. My dad
Mhm.
played in college. My mom was basketball. My dad was swimming. My brother was college basketball, and I was college volleyball. So just
Wow.
insane genetics. Um, and I knew I wanted to work in sports growing up because it was just the glue between my family. I just didn't know in what capacity. And so I was job shadowing the New Orleans Hornets, which are the Pelicans now, the NBA team in New Orleans, for career day, my senior year in high school. Um, and my dad dropped me off, and I'm like 16, 17 years old. And I was job shadowing the marketing and PR team that night. And they were so busy because Will Ferrell was there, and so they actually, like, stuck me with the stats guys. They're just like, "We're too busy, like, we know you need course credit, like, hang out with these guys." And it's actually crazy just to look back, like, that was the turning point for the better. Like, just one
Yeah.
split decision just changed my entire life path as, like, a 16, 17-year-old. So I'm with the stats guys all night, and everyone's like treating them like they're these gods. Just what they have in their hand, these like analytics, and just on a piece of paper, everyone's like waiting for it. And so it was just like a moment for me. I'm just like, who are these guys? Why are they so respected? I knew from that point on, this is what I want to do with my life. Like, I'm a woman that works in sports. I want to be respected. Numbers equals respect.
That was never part of the grand plan growing up, or like you didn't have this image in your mind of being an entrepreneur. Tell me a little bit about when that idea crept into your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been just hungry and a problem solver, right? Like just mentioning that little fiery, passionate little kid. And I got my first mini taste, I think, of entrepreneurship before I graduated college. So I knew I wanted to be a data scientist in an NBA team, like in the front office, which is like so small. And I mean, what? There's like 30, 32 NBA teams, and there's only 3 to 4 people that hold this position. Like, so just multiply that. That's how many people exist in the world. And I'm like gunning for that. And so, and even back in the day, I mean, there was probably a handful of women in those positions. And so, really small, but before I graduated, I think it was my junior year in college, one of my really good friends, his brother, was brought in for a project with the Miami Heat. And so he was just like, "Hey, you should talk to Tiff. Like, Tiff loves this stuff." And I got roped in with the Miami Heat and ended up doing the Goran Dragic trade, which is like one of the most important trades, I think, in NBA history. And I think it's just a highlight moment in my career. And then after that, I stayed really close with one of the guys, and he basically wanted to build this software. And he's like, "Hey, there's this company called Y Combinator. Um, I think we should apply for it." And so I was like, "Okay, cool. Let's do that." We didn't end up getting accepted, but it was actually down to the wire, like the whole nine, like beyond the application stage. And I actually like had an offer from ESPN around that time. So I was like, ESPN or Y Combinator. When we didn't end up getting it, I was like, okay, of course, I'm going to go work at ESPN. For a really long time there, it was about to be entrepreneurship or I go work within corporate.
Yeah. Well, so at some point you get the idea while working at ESPN that you're going to start a company. I wonder, even with your light exposure to startups, light exposure to Y Combinator, when you were thinking, I want to start a company, did you think to yourself, oh, I'm going to need to raise money for this? Or is that a concept that hadn't really quite entered your mind at that moment?
I think I knew to build, I needed capital. I think that was maybe the second thing that crossed my mind as I'm building a company because I didn't have savings. And also, my path was a little bit interesting. It was at ESPN, I become best friends with one of my colleagues. I quit to go do a startup with her, co founder breakup. And then now I'm pushed to figure out like what to do. When the first press story broke that student athletes could monetize, I just started going down this user interview deep hole with the creator economy for 6 months and then figured out what Curastory needed to be. But I don't think if I didn't take that trajectory of being in a startup and having a co-founder breakup, I don't think I don't know. I don't think I would probably be building right now because I learned a lot through that experience. And I also don't think I would jump from ESPN to building my own thing. Like that then catapult me into building my own thing. But I think when I went from ESPN to startup, there was so much I didn't know. Like I didn't have savings and like it was just a super risky move. And then now I'm after co-founder breakup, am I going to go back in corporate or
Right.
like what am I going to do? And it was so funny. I have Curastory in my mind and I'm like interviewing with like Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and I'm like telling them about this idea and they're just like, you're super smart. Like we would love for you to work here, but it never made sense. I was like, okay, I need to build this thing. That's actually what I have to do. But once I realized I needed to build it, I think the first thought I had was, okay, what is it? What needs to be built? And that was 6 months of user interviews. And then once I knew what it needed to be, the next thought after that was, okay, we need wireframes. Like I need to prototype it out. And then the next thought after that was raise off of prototypes. Like there was zero way, I think, with not being able to bootstrap or having savings that I was going to be able to build what needed to be built without capital.
Great. So at some point you have this realization that, ooh, can't do much more until I put money in the bank. What was the goal at that point? How much did you think that you wanted to raise the first time you were like, I need money to even start past the wireframe stage?
Had zero goal of what to raise. Like it was so interesting. So I have this idea. I'm like talking to investors from my network from the previous company where I had a co-founder breakup. And they told me you need a deck. And I was like, great, let me build a deck. And so built a deck and I'm getting these insane like tier 1 VC meetings, like the who's who in New York and with a really crappy deck. And I get to, and this is like pre-COVID. So like in person in the office with a really crappy deck. And I get to, her name's Maisha Leek. She used to be a partner at Human Ventures. She's on our board now. So I get to Human Ventures and I'm like pitching. I love her. But after she's like, okay, let me be the last VC that you talk to, actually, because I need you to understand. And this was before we met, actually, Jason, but she was just like, there are signals of just like things that you should be saying and not saying. And like, this needs to be more coherent. And like, I just don't want you to be laughed out of the offices. And so she's like, I need you to either join a boot camp or just like get everything in line. And she's like, I know this isn't what you want to hear right now, but I just want you to be super strong if you're going to get another meeting with first round capital. You know what I mean? So that was a really eye opening conversation. I think I came home crying just because I don't know. I think the feeling that it's going to take longer kind of set in, but I'm so happy that she ended up having that conversation with me because from there I stopped talking to VCs. And so I ended up moving from that and doing equity crowdfunding. And with the
Yeah.
wireframes and with the deck that I had at the time, just crafted a better story based off of some of the things that Maisha was telling me. And then we raised 250K in equity crowdfunding from the public in like a few months. And that
Wow.
was more than
Well,
enough to
yeah.
get an engineer, to build MVP, to get first sales. And there wasn't a goal though. Like I wasn't like I need 1 million or I need 250K. It was just like throw the story up and press on equity crowdfunding and like let's just see what happens.
First of all, I wanted to say that, like, I'm so glad you're sharing this part of the story
Yeah.
because it's really important for people to hear this version of the story because it would be so easy for you to have your story that you tell be, well, like, this is what I did, and like it just be so much more polished than the reality is. And it's a really important thing for people to hear because I would say 80 plus 90+% of first time founders, when they think they need to go raise capital, they don't know what to be doing. And I also think, we can't understate this enough, that the conversation that Maisha had with you was a really helpful and brave one. Like
Yeah.
most VCs take so many meetings with first time founders that are totally crappy. And honestly, the easy thing to do is to just pass or ghost and not talk to them ever again. And that doesn't help the founder almost at all. What helps them is a difficult conversation where they have to be radically candid with a founder and say like, hey, Tiffany, really liked you,
This
but
sucks.
this sucked. I mean, and obviously it sounded like she did it in a gentle way, but like without that, well, you would have just kept going in a certain direction, right?
Yeah, I would have kept
And then
going like left and like having all these meetings and nothing coming out of them and like maybe
and you would have been so
VCs.
confused,
Yeah.
right? You would have been like getting the message that you just weren't good rather than you just didn't know how to communicate.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
the second thing is, the reality is when a first time founder is trying to raise with very little, you do have to do whatever you can in order to get the money in order to get to the next stage so that you can tell a better story. So not everyone has a network of friends and family. That's the like uncomfortable joke that people tell, like, friends and family. What kind of friends and family do you have?
What do you
Where you
think
can
that
get
I
like
have? Exactly.
like $250,000 just to like prove yourself as a first time founder. And so kudos to you for just, you're grinding it out to get to the
Yeah.
point where it's like 250,000. Let's get someone who can help me build, and I can tell the next chapter of this
Yeah.
story. So you've actually raised, from what we can tell on Crunchbase, a couple rounds of funding beyond that $250,000 initial equity crowdfunding round. And instead of going through all the details of both raises, I wonder if we could just quickly start on the first raise. You end up raising, called a shade under $2 million with that next round. Tell me how that came together.
Yeah. So we were running out of the 250K, of course, because it's 250K.
You're down 30 to 15.
Exactly. Down 30 to 15. And we just finished our MVP and our first contract was with the NBA Players Association, which is actually just crazy to say that our first like creator contract was with NBA players. So we get a few of those guys on the platform and from just that alone, we were able to get into Techstars. So I knew money was running out. I needed to raise a actual seed because I was counting that as our pre-seed. Ended up getting accepted into Techstars based off of that. But even before that, we were still talking to VCs at that point. Like, we had some traction. Did your boot camp. So before going back out to raise again, I knew I didn't want to look stupid again. So doing fundraising with confidence was huge. So we did first tranche with Techstars, Lightspeed Scout Fund, and a few other just like well-known angels. And then that was, I think, about like 500K, 750. And then I was like, oh, okay, guys, got into Techstars. I don't want to fundraise during Techstars. So we'll talk to you in October or September. Mm-hmm. And so then we go through this pressurized environment with Techstars. And then I think what's interesting and what we've talked about and what I've heard is just anchoring a raise around something. So VCs don't ghost, and you kind of have this pressurized timeline and just urgency on them. And that is demo day, right? And so went back out to market around demo day and after demo day, and we closed up the remaining 1.6 and some change. But it was tough there and touch and go for a minute, like just running in a circle and just like chasing my own tail with like trying to get a lead. And I'm just like, who made this up? This is dumb. Like, I'm also not trying to raise 5 to 10 million. I think when you start to get into the upper echelon of values of what you're trying to raise, a lead makes total sense because it's just like de-risking the entire investment and them getting in your bank account and just like all of these things that leads do. It makes so much sense. But I think when it's like a value that you could easily party around or just get a ton of angels or small checks, I don't think it really matters. And so
well, let's stay on this topic because this is a really interesting tactic that not many people know about. And a lot of people run into this situation where they're raising less than $2 million. And the traditional school of thought is that we find a lead, the lead comes in, they take more than half the round, and then all the follow-up funds fill out the rest of your round. But as you're going to raise, as you found out, you'll meet a bunch of funds who are like, oh, like waiting for your lead. Tell me about your lead. We don't lead, but tell us when you do have a lead.
I've also seen it, not to cut you off, someone leads and they're just like, who's gonna follow? Like, and I'm just like, oh my God, it's just a never ending cycle.
When we come back, Tiffany tells us how she ended up closing her seed round, and we get to hear how one tiny move by a VC firm nearly destroyed Curastory. If you're a startup trying to sell into enterprises, I'm sure you've been dreading getting some sort of certification like SOC 2 or HIPAA. I know I did when I ran my last startup, and it cost us a lot of important deals. Well, you're in luck because not only is there an awesome solution called Vanta that makes the process dead simple, but also funded listeners get $1,000 off their service just by going to vanta.com/funded. Check it out. Yeah, so it's challenging on both ends, right? You do have to herd cats, if you will, and you have to be a strong, passionate voice in order to get these investors to kind of commit and actually move. And so this is a bit of judo that I talk a lot about in terms of fundraising, because you can have these situations where you have a lot of verbal commits or interested parties. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, do you remember what you did to then decide? You were articulating it already. You're like, why does it have to be like this? Why don't we just blah? Like, what did you do to start getting people to put checks in?
Yeah, I mean, it really was scouts and angels that, like, Lightspeed Venture Partners is not worried about 100K, 50K. Like, that's chump change for them. And so when we got that committed, from their approval, I was like, can I use the Lightspeed name? And they were just like, yeah, totally. And so, I mean, it's a tier one fund.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they're leading, but I'm saying that they're in the round. And so that actually
Did they
helps.
set the cap with you? Did they set the valuation cap with you?
No. So there wasn't, it's typically when, I mean, you're getting into bigger check sizes that conversation is had. So no, it was really just like, this is what I
Just to
think,
commit to
just a
be in the
party
round.
round. Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
And obviously Techstars is a little bit different, but it's like, if you raise above this amount, we can talk about these terms. And if you raise below this amount, then it's more rigid, then we can talk these terms. So that was the first tranche. And then once I closed up first tranche and started doing the Techstars program and not raising, I was like, we can talk in September. Then of course valuation changed. So just because we'd done so much in a 3-month
Right.
pressurized environment.
You set that valuation,
Yeah.
the next tranche. Yeah.
I
So
set the
that's
valuation
kind
on
of,
the next one as well.
love it. That's what I wanted to help sort of illuminate in this situation, because I get this question all the time, and how do you do it? The high level is that when someone says they want a lead or who's the lead, it's because they don't have, is this the right word? The balls to set valuation, or the balls to be like, I'm committing, right? And so
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that they need a lead. They just need a credible stamp that this is a good deal, and they need a valuation that is
Isn't
defensible,
crazy. Yeah.
isn't crazy, and is defensible. And so if you can manufacture those two things like you did, then you can pull together a party round. And the other thing that I'll call out, which is great, is either instinctually or through things that you learned, you did the first tranche. And then as Techstars was coming online, if people wanted to talk to you, you were like,
No.
not good. No. Right. And I think the most attractive thing that a venture capitalist can hear is
Is
no,
no.
in terms of what, yeah, is what'll get them going. So, I'm sure there's tons of other stories and details from that first race, I'm sure. But what I'd love to talk about is your next couple million, right? And I think this one, it gets a little spicy, right? So tell me a little
real
bit about
spicy.
tell me a little bit about what's happening at the company before you say, you know what, we want to go raise our next round of capital.
Yeah. Running out of runway yet again. Market was a little wobbly at that point. And it didn't make sense to do a Series A. This was like in the spring of 2022. And so
Yeah.
I just kind of started doing some research, talking to our board, and a seed extension made the most sense. That's what they were seeing a lot of founders doing in the market. A lot of people were having flat valuations, things like that. And so I was like, okay, like let's do a seed extension. And so I didn't do kind of the cold, warm outreach that I think a round should have. It was a reach out from Elysian. And around the time that I'm literally thinking that I need to pivot from Series A to seed, like around the time where I'm like, okay, we're going to run out of money, I got a ping from Elysian. And I knew I wanted to raise about 3 million, and Elysian didn't get the full 3 million. So we had to essentially get follows, right? So it's been, and just from market, it's been a crazy year, and just, it's not the normal 2-month close that a hot 2021 market was. It's very grueling and different. And we had maybe like half just wired and committed of the 3 million that we needed. And I'm still out in market raising, and we get a term sheet for literally 3 million, and
An
at
additional 3
an additional 3 at Yeah, so
Amazing.
that would have put us at what, like 4 or 5 at the price that Elysian set. And it was going to be a priced round just to clean up our cap table.
Well, you must have been super excited.
So excited. I mean, it's my first, it would have been the biggest check in the company at that point. It was a term sheet. It was a priced round. It was all the things I'd never gone through before. And so
Yeah.
we executed on term sheet at the valuation that I wanted. And I'm like, oof, we're about to be flush with cash, can do all the other additional things that I need to do. And our lawyers, Lowenstein, they started confirmatory DD. Like they were getting all the information. This is also around the SVB bank crash, by the way.
A super fun time to be raising.
Super fun time. I was on a plane when that happened. That was wild. But sorry, I digress. So we're getting confirmatory due diligence together. Like all of our investors are checking to make sure we're okay. And so the VC at the time that wanted to do the $3 million price reached out to get on the phone with me. And they basically asked for valuation to be cut in half.
Wow. They were
And
retrading the deal.
after an executed term sheet, yeah. Like as we are in the middle of pulling final docs for confirmatory. So I'm like racking up legal fees. And also like they're asking for a valuation from our last round when we have, I mean, about 10 million in ARR like signed for the year in sales. And so I was just like, wait, what? And we have a pro forma, so I can clearly see black and white how much ownership they would have. They would have gone from 9 to 10% to like 28 to 30% ownership in the company. And I'm sitting here thinking, do I walk away knowing that runway is ending before our 10 million in ARR starts? Or do I say yes, have a partner on the board that would do all these just like frustrating things and give them basically like 10% away from just the ownership that I have in the company? Just
Before you move on, Tiff, I
yeah.
think just like you kind of yada yada over it, as in like this is commonplace, but it's a scary horror story that I think people hearing as like a real story is worth underlining, which is people don't realize that term sheets are not really legal documents. They're not there. There's no recourse for a founder to take if a VC firm issues a term sheet, signs it, and says, "Yeah, this is what we're going to do." You can't sue for that money, right? A term sheet is a indication that they want to do something, and really the only blowback, the only risk that they have is reputational. And reputation is, I mean, that is like one of the most important things a VC has. But at the end of the day, if they want to pull out of a signed term sheet, they totally can. And so I always tell founders, it's not over until it's over. It's not
Until it's
over until the
wired.
money, the money is in the bank. It's not over. And I
Yeah.
think too often people just like celebrate early, and they don't keep pushing. They
That's
don't,
literally what I did.
keep it tight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not your
because it
fault,
was,
but it's more just like something that people need to understand is a reality. It's a possibility, right?
yeah, no, 1,000%. And it was really hard, but after like talking to our board and knowing that we had sales coming in, that was going to be our biggest cash flows in history, I was just like, my back's against the wall here. And I feel like if it was different, I would probably have said yes and taken the valuation cut. But I knew the situation that we were in, and so I walked away. I ended up sending a newsletter just to update everyone with what's going on, both current investors and prospective investors. And I mean, I was blunt. I was open. This is what has happened. We had a VC try to cut after for no reason, cited because they didn't start confirmatory due diligence. So they couldn't cite anything in paperwork that was not true. And so
Yeah.
the response after that email was just like so positive. I mean, I'm telling you, every tier one VC fund, like that whoever's listening is probably thinking about, all of them emailed me and was just like, we would have told our founders to do the same thing. Like, this is
Oh, wow.
horrible. This is shitty. Like, we're just so sorry this happened to you. We know you're going to crush it. And so I think just getting that validation was super helpful, that I'm not crazy for walking away from a $3 million term sheet, execute a term sheet because of just what they did after the fact. And I just pivoted from saving cash flows, letting people know what was going on. From that email, we got additional investment on the current round that was still open at our same terms that Elysian set. So that was helpful. It was tough for a while though. Like we were late on payroll, but I called our board and I was like, hey, like, help. And so they're just like, oh my God, yeah, like we'll get through this. And so scary moment, but yeah.
When you look back on all this, you've been through the ringer a few times now, and you've seen a lot of variations in the way people behave, the way you've behaved, the way you've had to set yourself up for a fundraise. On that note, what do you think? What are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way that you're going to try to really apply to this next fundraise?
Yeah, I want multiple term sheets. Like, I think using that as leverage, I feel like super helpful. Also, I think doing my due diligence on the fund. And I'm not talking about do they have dry powder? I'm not talking about that due diligence. I'm talking about talking to other founders. Have they pulled term sheets before? And it's something that no one talks about. But whenever I sent the email out, there were some VCs that said that they pulled a term sheet from their founders. So they've done it before. But that's something different that I'm going to do. Just like that way with the term sheets that I'll have in front of me for Series A, like I'll know just if there's anything to look out for. So I think those are the two things that I would do differently on the upcoming race.
Yeah. To shift gears to something a little bit more positive.
Yes.
Tell me, what was it like when the sales contracts started coming through and the college football season kicked off? How's that been like for the company?
Amazing, because I think you are operating from just a different perspective. It's like you've moved from just operating off of VC capital to sales. And I think at some point, every company and founder needs to, like, you are in the business of cash flows, period. Like that is, and I saw this amazing Twitter thread about this, but I think a lot of founders forget this, that you are in the business of cash flows. You are not in the business of runway ends, raise next VC round. And so at some point, you need to shift your mindset. And I think I was forced into shifting that mindset with this situation. Like I was forced into a VC's not coming to save me because these are crappy terms that they just tried to renegotiate after execution. Like, you're now forcing me to just really like focus on the cash flows of the business and us doing that ourselves. And so I think
total blessing in disguise. Like I think you getting through it and then having the hard lesson that forced you to start shifting gears is, I mean, it's going to pay dividends down the road in your Series A and beyond. Before the interview ended, as a huge sports fan, I was excited to ask Tiffany what the craziest things Curastory has been a part of. I'm not sure if her answer made me happy or jealous.
I mean, current Heisman, like Caleb Williams for sure. It's insane. Like just what a lot of these players are getting right now. Knowing from their managers just like what they're used to getting has been an eye-opening experience. But yes, they're 1,000% are 17-year-olds walking around multimillionaires. Easy.
That's actually cool. I respect it, and I think I think they should be paid. And go through Curastory. That was my conversation with Tiffany Kelly, founder and CEO of Curastory, where people ranging from professional athletes to top creators can create, distribute, and monetize their videos everywhere. When we come back, I'm interested in seeing Paige's thoughts on the interview and all the problems that Tiff encountered and conquered. A ton of founders I meet know that dilution when fundraising is something they should be careful about. But beyond that, they don't really know what goes into it. And that's a problem, because not knowing how your ownership is affected when you raise different amounts of capital at different valuations can be quite damaging. If you're even slightly unsure about it, head over to adamantventures.com, click on tools, and grab my free dilution planning tool. That'll run you through the basics of dilution, show you an ownership sensitivity table, and even help you see the impact of multiple rounds of fundraising on your final ownership levels. I hope that helps. If you have any questions on the topic, feel free to hit me up.
So, Jason, a lot happened in this episode with Tiffany. I honestly don't even know where to start, because some of the things I can't even believe have happened to her along this very long fundraising journey. So there's definitely things I want to touch on, things I'm confused by of what happened, but maybe I can just hear your first thoughts on the episode since you were there.
Yeah, I mean, so I've known Tiffany for a while and have heard like bits and pieces of this story along the way. And so getting her to sit down and really like pull back the curtains and talk about all the little details was crazy. Like I'm confused, honestly. Like I'm confused that some of this stuff would happen to her.
Yep.
But it was really neat. I hadn't ever actually heard her backstory too, and how it all really ties together. And so, yeah, a lot of the demonstrations of grit now make a lot of sense for me. But yeah, would be curious what really stood out for you.
No, 100%. And before I ask you what I was kind of confused on, I just wanted to say that I really liked this emphasis on competitive sports that she built going into it. You know, anytime someone plays up until their college years in any sport, you know they're a dedicated human being, because
Yeah,
that
super elite.
it takes serious amount of grit to get that far with sports. So I thought that really allowed me to see why she was even able to not give up with what she was going through. I was honestly shocked that she kept pushing through. So this leads me to my first question, which so she started off kind of at a rocky start with her first fundraise. I feel like she had this really awesome idea and she just didn't know much about fundraising or the process at all. And I thought it was really cool how that one VC stopped her in her tracks and kind of showed her the right direction to go in. But I was confused by what equity crowdfunding is and why that was perfect for her situation. I don't know. I don't really understand how that led her to be able to close that round. So if you could.
Yeah. No, it's the whole start of the conversation and how messy it was. I'm glad we had someone to finally tell this story, because I think it just is too easy to like glaze over the stuff that you're embarrassed by as a first time founder. It's like, actually, most founders, I feel like if they didn't have some connection into the venture capital or startup world beforehand, and they were just working on a product and realized they needed to raise money, probably would do something very similar to Tiffany. But you just don't hear those stories. So she was vulnerable enough to share that she was like, well, I just knew I needed to try to raise money and heard that you should create a deck and talk to venture capitalists. So that's what I did, and obviously did that terribly. I think in particular, you were just fast forwarding into why she wanted to go after equity crowdfunding. So I'm going to butcher timelines and dates, but the ability to raise from crowdfunding is a relatively new phenomenon. Probably
Okay.
in the last 7-ish years is when it became an option for people to raise for their startups. And I think equity crowdfunding can be perfect or as she put it, or at least a good fit when you have a product that speaks to consumers, as in like individuals, not deep technical venture capitalists that are looking for new technologies that, most people on the street would never have heard of. So for her, she was working in sports and media. And so if you talk about sports and media to a layperson or a person that's just interested in sports, they have a better chance of encouraging them to put a little bit of money in. So
Hmm.
for her, she wasn't raising that much money, which is another good reason for equity crowdfunding to be a fit. It's like you don't expect to raise millions and millions of dollars from there. So if you can somehow put together $100,000 from equity crowdfunding, that's a good fit. And I think that's what she was going after at first.
And that's I guess I'm still a little confused. And that's public? Like, did she announce this publicly? Because I know there's certain laws in place that make this kind of tricky.
Yeah, there are laws in place about accredited investors and and who can actually invest in private companies, but new regulations, like I said, around 7 years ago, made that available so that you could go on sites like Crowdfunder and
Oh,
Republic
okay.
in order to post. I mean, you essentially like post it like it's a social media post, like this is Curastory, this is who I am. A lot of times there'll be a video, and it's like, do you want to invest in my company? Here's who I am, and here are the terms. And it's like another social media page.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, clearly that VC who helped her out knew what she was doing, and then obviously loved what Curastory was about because now she's literally on her board. So yeah, I think that was very noble of her to kind of show her the way because she didn't have to do that. She didn't have to tell her, "Hey, listen, if you keep going out here, you're just going to keep being put in the chaos, and you're going to get no's." Like she decided to go out of her way to
Yeah.
help
I
Tiffany,
mean,
and
I said this live to Tiffany, but it's like that is highly unusual for an investor to
yeah,
go out of their way and to like pull someone aside because it's like as noble as a venture capitalist might be, it's like you get tons of deals and founders that come across your desk like every week that aren't good and need coaching and need more time. And it's like you want to help everyone. The noblest of VCs want to help everyone, but just really don't have the time to do it. And knowing that like you spend a little bit of time with a founder or anyone and it like snowballs into the amount of time that you're going to have to spend with them, right? It's like if you give a mouse a cookie kind of thing. And so for her to take the time to give difficult feedback, right? To say something that isn't going to feel awesome at the moment, to spend extra time to put someone on a better path, like that's a huge thing for her to do for Tiffany way back then.
I guess it's just an example of that, founder investor fit
Hmm.
that it just clicked. Like, I don't she must have known something that she was like, "I see it. You might have not explained it that well or shown it to me, but I see it and I'm in." So,
Yeah,
I think that's
and
really
I
cool.
think, the other thing to call out was if I had to guess, it was 95% what she saw in Tiffany, not the idea. Like,
Yes.
ideas are a dime a dozen, and at that earliest stage, she must have just been like, "Look, this is a fighter. This is someone who's passionate about it. I like her background." And we were talking a little bit about the sports background before.
Yes.
There are some VCs who, and I'm actually a fan of this too in investing and in hiring, but there are some VCs that will explicitly say, if you were a college athlete or above, like that is a huge, huge vote of confidence in my book because of what we know it takes for you to get there, the amount of hard work, the amount of dedication, the amount of grit, the amount of like suffering that you have to go through. It's not too dissimilar to what you're going to
2 a
have to go
days.
through. Yeah, 2 a days exactly. It's not too dissimilar what you're going to have to go through in order to be successful in the startup world. So a lot of them love backing former athletes. I wonder if that was the case here, but certainly I think the bet was all on Tiffany.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. She said it herself. If she's down 15 or she's down 30, she's still not out. And
Yeah.
she was talking about all of her friends are wondering why is she not burned out? She's built for it. So I
Yeah. And like, I think this is just a good topic to pull the thread around. So, not all listeners and people trying to raise capital, very few actually will relate to Tiffany's background, will be able to say, like, I was an elite college athlete and can talk about that grit. But, it is something. that investors are looking for, like explicitly looking for, and trying to understand whether or not a founder has that fight in them. And if you happen to be a college athlete, that's going to be something that you'll be able to talk about. But if you're not a college athlete, there's got to be something else in you and your background and your recent experience and your way back when experience that gives an investor the confidence that you do have that similar level of fight, that you
Yeah.
do know what it means to put in hard work in order to get to, a goal or achieve something. So whatever that is, like we all have to be looking for that when we go out to raise capital.
Yeah, it's so important to be able to look at your life and figure out how you can showcase that grit or that motivation. Like what in your life, what story, what something, anything that you can then take and shape into, being a good storyteller. But I
Yeah.
do have something else that I do want to dive into kind of the spicier part of the episode. Um, Number one, because wow. And number two, because I'm just confused on how this was legal and if it is. So I don't know if I'm stating this correctly, but why would pulling out, or in her case, the VC changing the valuation after an executed term sheet be legal? Like, how far is an executed term sheet like done, or is it close? I just want to
Yeah.
understand the timeline better.
Yeah. So right after I did the interview, I was like, did I misspeak? And I had to actually go back and ask some friends and do some searching. Because I think I was very explicit around saying that term sheets are not legally binding contracts. And what I found is that it depends. Like there are some term sheets that are written in a way that are legally binding contracts and some that aren't. You have to look at how they're written. But in my understanding and my experience as a venture capitalist, um, they're not actually considered legally binding term sheets, legally binding documents. They are kind of like intents, like a written intent to do something, to actually write the full documents in the legally binding contract to be part of, an investment round. Um, but either way, well, first I'll tell you what the timeline is, because that's what you asked about. The timeline of a deal happening is initial conversations with a bunch of investors, deeper conversations with a handful of investors that are interested, and then getting down to the wire of negotiating terms and talking about the idea of actually doing a deal together. And when we get to that level, in order to memorialize or fully articulate this interest in a company, an investor will write a term sheet in which it's usually a 1 or 2 page document that outlines the high level, most important terms that are going to go into the investment round. Usually that takes into account valuation. Some other big things are like board seats that they are going to expect. Sometimes it's like if we need a refresh on the employee option pool. And they're not written in fully detailed legalese. It's just like 1 page of being like,
Oh,
here are
okay.
the things that we discussed. We can sign it and be like, yeah, we're into it. We're into it. But
So,
it's
s-
not like, okay, if we break this here, you go to jail or you break this here and you are liable for X, Y, and
so
Z.
what you're saying is if you get an executed term sheet, keep running your process.
Keep pushing, keep running the process. Like it sounds like such a trite and like just old wives' tale of you never know what happens and push till the end. And it sounds like that until it happens to you. And
Yep.
then every other time you do this, you're going to be pushing until you see dollars hit your bank account. So
Oh, yeah.
yes, you got to push all the way to the end. And, so the timeline goes sign term sheet. And then usually there's confirmatory diligence is what they call it. It's like, okay, we said we're going to do this, but we need to check on the last few details. And once we check on the last few details and like we're good, we then create what are called definitive docs. Those are like the 20 to 30 plus pages of legal documents that
Sheesh.
outline everything. Those get signed, and then we put money in the bank. The reality is, even if that signed term sheet is a technically legal document, the recourse that a founder has if you back away from it or say you're not going to move forward is so little. Like, it would take more time, effort, and money to pursue some sort of legal action or sue a firm for backing out on a term sheet. And like, at the end of the day, like, it wouldn't be worth it. The biggest risk a venture capitalist has around backing out of a term sheet, the way Tiffany experienced, is the impact on their reputation.
Yes.
And that is a massive impact, but one that a lot of VCs, especially during the the correction and the crash of 2022, when stuff was going crazy and
Yeah.
no one knew what valuations were going to be, I feel like venture capitalists felt like, look, if there's any time to pull a term sheet or to renege on a deal, it's now, because the market, if I had to explain it to anyone, I'd be like, look, we signed a term sheet at this right in the middle of the crash of the markets, and we had to pull out for X, Y, and Z. We've never done that before. We'll never do it again. Like, it'd be easier to explain. But regardless, really, really tough thing to go through. And I think we talked a little bit about this, but like, if you have a process going on, a lot of people are talking, and then you sign a term sheet, usually you talk to everyone else who was interested and say, look, we're going with this term sheet and this investor. Appreciate you being interested. Maybe next time. And so everyone leaves. And so
Oh,
you sign the term sheet saying you're going to go with the one person that you thought you were going to go with, and they retrade the deal, they pull the term sheet or whatever. It's really hard to go back to everyone else and be like, hey, just kidding. Like, can we still talk about this? Because they've already lost
just
momentum.
kidding.
They're curious why the person pulled the term sheet or why they changed the deals. Is it like, do they know something that we don't know?
It's too
Why?
late.
Yeah. It just like, there are too many question marks, and now you've lost every option. It's
So,
terrible.
again, just to restate, you keep running your process
Yeah.
until that money is in the bank.
Yeah. You
That
got
is
to
what
keep pushing.
you have to. And I'm sure, like, going through this, Tiffany now will never be like, this is the one. All right, I'm done. Bye, guys. She's going to keep her options open, and it's going to end up making her an even stronger founder. So,
Yeah.
who knows? And she still, because she bounced back quick, she's a competitive person. She was
Competitive
able to
as F. Yeah.
yes, she is. And she was able to bounce back and get some investments under her belt from um deciding to go about the situation in a open and honest way. She sent that email out and she was able to reap some benefits from it. So all power to her. And I'm excited to see what Curastory does. So
Yeah. And I think like a good point to wrap up on it is like, in life and in fundraising, I feel like there are things that happen to you that in the moment are like terrible. They like objectively are just, I cannot believe that thing happened to me. I can think of more than a handful in my life, both in fundraising and else and other things. But almost all those tend to, like, you look back on them and you're like, huh, it seemed terrible at the time, but wow, like, blessing in disguise. If we had done
always.
this, if we had done that, if this had happened, like, would I be where I am today? Like, just like butterfly effect and the benefit of 2020 hindsight is crazy. So I, talked a little bit about it with Tiffany, but the fact that she could get further on less money because she wasn't able to take that firm's money, amazing. Like, that means she's going to get to a different level and be able to potentially raise more money at lower dilution.
Yep.
And then like we talked about, I think that firm probably showed their true colors. And it's like, well, even if we had signed at the terms that we had initially agreed upon, like, if they were going to do that, then what would they have been like to work with? So another dodge bullet there. So
Oh yeah.
I'm also extremely excited to see what Tiffany does. She's entering a big college football season. Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, Colorado, who they're working with, is like, doing a lot for media, the media rights that she influences. And so, yeah, I think we're definitely going to be doing another episode checking back in on this because it's a great story. If you're looking for more insights, strategies, and support around fundraising, subscribe to our weekly newsletter at fundedpod.com/newsletter. Also, find me on social. I'm at Jayeh, that's Jayeyeh, on almost every platform. I respond to newsletter replies and DMs, so hit me up. This episode was produced by Paige Randall.
Hey guys.
Thanks also to John O'Lee from Adamant.
Hey, everyone.
And thanks to Tiffany Kelly for her inspirational stories on how to always come back down in the fourth quarter, or whatever it is you do in volleyball. As always, one last thanks to our fantastic sponsor, Vanta, the leading automated security and compliance platform.